Good morning. Welcome to Emmaus, welcome to church. Good to see everybody. There's actually people here right now instead of out there. It's just a change, it's a good change. Glad to see everybody. You can stand and sing. We're going to sing some songs lifting up the name of God in this place. You're welcome to sing as loud as you possibly can as well. is Lord. Sing hallelujah, Christ is risen. Oh, come to the altar, the Father's arms are open wide. Forgiveness was bought with the precious blood of Jesus Christ.
These are the names of the sons of Israel who went to Egypt with Jacob, each with his family: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, and Benjamin, Dan and Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. The descendants of Jacob numbered 70 in all. Joseph was already in Egypt. Now Joseph and all his brothers and all that generation died, but the Israelites were exceedingly fruitful. They multiplied greatly, increased in numbers, and became so numerous that the land was filled with them. Then a new king, to whom Joseph meant nothing, came to power in Egypt. Look, he said to his people, the Israelites have become far too numerous for us. Come, we must deal shrewdly with them, or they will become even more numerous. And if war breaks out, we'll join our enemies, fight against us, and leave the country. So they put slave masters over them to oppress them with forced labor, and they built Pithom and Ramesses as store cities for Pharaoh. But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and spread. So the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites and worked them ruthlessly. They made their lives bitter with harsh labor in brick and mortar and with all kinds of work in the fields. In all their harsh labor, the Egyptians worked them ruthlessly. The king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, whose names were Shiphrah and Puah, when you are helping Hebrew women during childbirth, on the delivery stool, if you see the baby is a boy, kill him, but if it is a girl, let her live. The midwives, however, feared God and did not do what the king of Egypt had told them to do. They let the boys live. Then the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and asked them, why have you done this? Why have you let the boys live? The midwives answered Pharaoh, Hebrew women are not like Egyptian women. They are vigorous and give birth before the midwives arrive. So God was kind to the midwives, and the people increased and became even more numerous. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families of their own. Then Pharaoh gave this order to all his people: every Hebrew boy that is born you must throw into the Nile, but let every girl live.
Thank you, Joye. Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome to the first chapter of our long-awaited series on Exodus. We're going to be in Exodus chapter 1 today, and I'm going to encourage you to continue to read this book at home during the week to get familiar with it. This particular Sunday, the PowerPoint and accompanying slides did not make it to church, and so as a result, you'll probably need to either open your Bibles or open your digital Bible or use one of the outlines here. We will, in fact, cover every verse of Exodus chapter 1 today, because there's a lot there to look at. And I'm going to consider this series a journey and invite you to walk with me through it each Sunday for the next 4 months. And you will be astounded and amazed as God reveals his character, as we see the mighty hand of God at work in the world then. But it's not only then that we're talking about. This is an old book for a new year. Has a lot to say to us here in the year 2023. And we're going to get going with it. Pastor Dave mentioned the movie. It was interesting, to see that, what they chose to add, because obviously in these kinds of shows, much like The Chosen, they will take some liberty in embellishing some scenes more for the way they want to develop the plot, and they will leave some things out that you may watch and say, why on earth was that left out? So you're here today, and I'm going to give you the straight goods on what the book of Exodus has to say as we go through chapter 1 verse for verse. So, you ready to come along for the ride? Amen. Amen. Me too. I would like to, this is probably the only time I'll do it, but I want to make sure that I don't forget to do some attribution with this message, because I've had a lot of good tools and a lot of good help. My friend Dan Dyke in Cincinnati and a pastor friend, Jeff in Indiana, have shared with me some of their reflections. Dan was the former Old Testament professor at Cincinnati Christian University, and Jeff is an old preaching buddy that I go back with. Jeff sent me a number of his outlines and also a list of the commentaries that he found most valuable, so I didn't waste my time sifting through commentaries that weren't going to be very much use. He even offered to mail them to me, but it would have cost more money to purchase them. And one that I found quite interesting, and the voice might be familiar to you, or the name, Dennis Prager. So the Jewish scholar, and I guess he's a media personality as well. He's not a Christian. He's a Jewish man, and he looks at Exodus from the eyes of a modern-day Jew, and it offers some helpful perspective. It's very readable, and it's verse by verse, all through the book of Exodus. And this has had some value for me. So if you were going to spend some money, there are a lot of good commentaries, and of course, you're not going to get a lot in here that accentuates Jesus as the promised Messiah, but you are going to get a lot of good information about the Jewish perspective and a historical perspective on the story. If you were to ask a Jewish person, what is the most important book in the Bible? What is the most important book in the Torah? I have no doubt that they would say Exodus is the most, and certainly if you ask who is the most important man in the Old Testament, hands down, Moses. Not David, not Saul, just Moses. And so it's a really big deal. So thinking about the movie and its errors and omissions and that, how familiar are you? Let's start with that question. How well do you know the book of Exodus? What do you know about it? Quite a bit? A little? Everything? Nothing? Just enough to be dangerous. How about that, huh? Let me tell you, you will love it, you will hate it, you will question it, you will be moved by it, wowed by it, puzzled by it, dismayed by it, disgusted with it, and fascinated with it. So fasten your seatbelts. This is one of the most compelling narratives in the entire existence of the world. It's indispensable to fully understanding Scripture, the New Testament, theology, humanity, the gospel, history, and culture. Exodus displays racism, slavery, genocide, homicide, infanticide, xenophobia, pandemics, all kinds of depravity, injury, love, hate, domestic quarrels, idolatry, murder, war, plunder, cursing, and blessing. It's all there in this book of Exodus. You may not even realize how much these events in history shape our theology, shape our Western culture, shape our worldview, our government, the Middle East, our Western world, our laws and moral codes come out, spring forth from the law as taught in the book of Exodus. And whether you're a believer or not, whether you follow the Bible or not, if you've grown up in the West, you have been profoundly shaped by the book of Exodus. It's engraved on our monuments, woven into our statutes, embedded in our psyches, reflected in our policies and our laws, and affecting our subconsciousness and undergirding our society even today. It is so relevant to 2023, and it's so active in our lives. And we're going to remember together. The book has a lot to do with remembering. It's a book that starts with forgetfulness. The Pharaoh forgets what the Hebrews have done for Egypt. It begins with forgetfulness. So we're going to remember the hard labor of oppression, the brilliance of the burning bush, the terror of the 10 plagues, the celebration of the Passover, the miraculous crossing of the Red Sea, the pillar of fire and the pillar of cloud, the desert wanderings, military conquest, the provision of water, of manna, of quail, the giving of the 10 commandments, the golden calf, the blueprints and the building of the tabernacle, the priesthood, and the face-to-face encounters with God. The man Moses and all the other characters, the glory of God behind the veil, the mercy, the wrath, and the glory of the true living God, and the way out. That's what Exodus literally means, the way out. And it's so named because the Israelites exited the land of Egypt where they were enslaved and began the great wilderness journey to the promised land. And we're going to join them on that journey. Before we escape Egypt, though, with the children of Israel, let's remind ourselves how they got there. Like, if you just pick up and read in Exodus, you're missing a lot of background in history. Yeah, how did they get there in the first place? There's a reason they are called the children of Israel. It's not because they acted like children, which they often did. It was not because God loved them like children, though he did. And not as a term of endearment, although some have come to view it as such. It is because they were Israel's children, literally. Israel's children. Jacob's children. You may remember that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob wrestled with God, and God dislocated Jacob's hip and let him know who his boss, but Jacob would not let go. Clung to him. I'm going to hang on to you, God, until you give me a blessing. And so he receives a blessing. He receives a blessing. This is part of the backstory. So, Jacob had 12 sons, including Joseph, to go many covers. His brother sold him into slavery, which landed him in Egypt. He rose to a position of greatness there, so that when famine struck, the Egyptians were prepared because he had built granaries and put food away for the shortage. And the rest of Joseph's family ended up being reunited and reconciled with Joseph, who then proceeded to save the Egyptian people from starvation and worse, and become a ruler in Egypt. And so the children of Israel came to live in Egypt. So Exodus is a continuation of Genesis, the promises made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and followed by 400 years of slavery in Egypt. And this book of Exodus begins with that reality. The reality, if you want to follow along in your notes, is the story of Israel in Egypt. So that's where we begin. Exodus 1, verses 1 to 7. Now these are the names of the sons of Israel who came to Egypt with Jacob. They came each one with his household: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, and Benjamin, Dan and Naphtali, Gad and Asher. All the persons who came from the loins of Jacob were 70 in number, but Joseph was already in Egypt. Joseph died, and all his brothers, and all that generation, but the sons of Israel were fruitful and increased greatly and multiplied and became exceedingly mighty, so that the land was filled with them. You can count the names later. 12 sons. When the whole clan journeyed together to Egypt, it was 70 people. Eventually, Joseph and his brothers died there, but the family tree really took root, and it had sprouted big time in that place. And they reflected what God had commanded way back in the garden. And indeed, they were fruitful, abundantly fruitful, and they had multiplied greatly, and they became quite the force in the Egyptian census, and Egypt was full of them. The next stage of the story, we see king over Egypt. Israel in Egypt. Now let's take a look at the king over Egypt. Exodus 1, 8 to 10. Now a new king arose over Egypt, who did not know Joseph. He said to his people, "Behold, the people of the sons of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come, let us deal wisely with them, or else they will multiply, and in the event of war, they will also join themselves to those who hate us and fight against us and depart from the land. The King James Version puts it this way: there arose a Pharaoh who knew not Joseph. How many of you are familiar with that statement? There arose a Pharaoh who knew not Joseph. Most Jewish people would know, among the many verses they might be familiar with, would almost certainly know this one. That phrase is so rich. Maybe the king didn't know his history. He didn't realize how Israel came to Egypt or what they had done on behalf of his nation or what their God had done. Perhaps he couldn't have cared less that Joseph saved his land and led the people through the famine and was actually a ruler who built the granary and food distribution systems and sat on the throne and frequented the palace and brought his whole family with him, cultivated favorable influence. He was a somebody. He was an important person in the administration of the state of Egypt under that Pharaoh. Maybe he couldn't have cared less, this Pharaoh, about all that history. Maybe it's a case of, well, fine, that was then. What have you done for me lately? The Pharaoh would have scoffed at Proverbs 27:10, where it says, do not forsake your own friend or your father's friend. Or maybe he did know and refused to acknowledge Joseph. There was a time in Egypt's history where they had to drive out the Hyksos people, foreigners who had attacked them and taken over them and briefly occupied parts of Egypt. So maybe they were especially suspicious towards other groups. You've seen this principle at work, right? You used to have favor, and then suddenly, there's a new sheriff, and you don't. One of the best examples I can think of from my own life was at my previous church. They built a Starbucks nearby about the same year as we started the church. And I was really out there every day. I don't think there was any day I wasn't. When the building was completed and I had this nice corner office, I used to get teased about how much time I spent at Starbucks. But it was a very special relationship there. I knew every barista, every manager who came and went. I got to know the staff. Originally, I went there because it was a great place for me to work on sermons. For me, there's something about the background noise, or the ability to take a break without actually taking a break, by just looking up, listening, seeing who's there, who's coming in and out, what's being discussed. And it finally turned out that I couldn't do any work there at all, because I sort of became, most of them were not Christians, but I sort of became a pastor counselor to staff and customers alike. It was really a pretty cool thing. I'd been out of town, my wife and I went down east for some holidays, and we were gone for about 4 weeks, and I got back to the Starbucks, and there was a new manager, and that new manager had brought on several new baristas and staff members, and I left out a part of the story. I had my seat. There was a seat I had every day. It was mine. I took this seriously. It was my seat, and it would always, almost always, be available for me. I didn't ask them to do it, but a staff member would come in, maybe throw their backpack on that seat. It was right at the counter, overlooking, when I call it the bar or the serving area. And, staff would be slow and wander over and chat with me there. Often, I didn't pay for my coffee. I tried to, but they just had it ready. It's on the house, Jim, and all of this. And, I walked in there one day after vacation. My seat was taken. I had to sit somewhere else. I was really well aware that the guy in my seat was drinking a tall, which is the smallest size, and making that thing last about 2-3 hours. I mean, at least I would, when I paid rent, okay? I'd get a bagel or something. He'd try to do something to pay it. He wasn't even paying rent. So this is how it's going to be, huh? And my privilege, if you will, was gone. The winds had shifted. There was a new manager who knew not Jim. And so in this case, this new Pharaoh doesn't know or doesn't care, or both. He's politically savvy. He's an Egyptian nationalist. He's a patriot. Let's handle this problem now. And so it begins, which takes us to the next part of the story. The children of Israel in Egypt, king over Egypt, suffering under Egypt. That's next, suffering under Egypt. Exodus 1, 11 to 14. So they appointed taskmasters over them to afflict them with hard labor. And they built for Pharaoh storage cities, Pithom and Ramses. But the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and the more they spread out, so they were in dread of the sons of Israel. The Egyptians compelled the sons of Israel to labor rigorously, and they made their lives bitter with hard labor in mortar and bricks and in all kinds of labor in the field. All their labors which they rigorously imposed on them. So the Israelites went, listen, they went from being a privileged, protected group with incredible influence and protections to a despised, ridiculed, maligned, and oppressed people. There's something about that statement that ought to ring true to us as we look at the perception being nurtured in our country and in the West towards Christians. Stephen McAlpine, a very good blogger that I follow, writes about our own cultural movement as Christians. And this is what he says. I thought I would share this with you. You mean I'm the bad guy? How did that happen? It's not easy to be the baddie. It's particularly disconcerting when you didn't used to be, but then you suddenly realize that that's how others see you. And so it is that this line from the 1993 film Falling Down has lodged itself in the front of my mind in the last couple of years. It stars Michael Douglas as William Foster, who starts his day in the film as an average law-abiding citizen. But things go wrong, and they compound. And many of the things that go wrong are unjust, and he reacts, and as he reacts, he ends up as the bad guy, on the wrong side of the law. And McAlpine says it comes as a complete surprise to him. He has no idea how it has happened or how to deal with it. He writes, most Christians don't have much in common with Douglas's character, William Foster, but I'm guessing that in the past year or so, you've had a conversation with a non-Christian neighbor that didn't go well. Or you've overheard a discussion between work colleagues expressing anger over Christian views on a particular issue. Or you've read or watched a piece in the media taking pot shots at biblical ethics, and you've thought to yourself something like, you mean, we're bad guys now? How's that? When did this happen? And he writes, because yes, in the eyes of much of Western society, Christianity is the bad guy. Christianity is the problem. It built for a while, but then suddenly it happened so quickly that it's taken many of us by surprise. Only a few generations ago, he writes, Christianity was the good guy. Christianity was the solution to what was bad. Rather than being on the wrong side of the law, we were the law. Christian morality was assumed and passed mainly unchallenged. The cultural, legal, and political power structures affirmed Christians. Then something changed. He said, over the course of the 20th century, and of course with greater pluralism and globalism, he says, we became just one of the guys. Fair enough. One option among many. A voice to be considered, but not to be followed unquestioned. If Christianity worked for you, fine. If it didn't work for me, also fine. McAlpine writes, most of us think we still live in that world. Most Christian books, sermons, and podcasts assume that we do. In many ways, though, we've only just worked out how to live as one of the guys. But the problem is that's not where we are now. The tide has shifted further. He writes, increasingly, Christianity is viewed as the bad guy. Christianity is no longer an option. It's a problem. It's a problem. The cultural, political, and legal guns that Christianity once held are now trained on us, and it's happened quickly. The number of those professing faith is falling dramatically. The number of those who reject the faith they held until their late teens has risen dramatically. And he says, the seat at the cultural table that we assumed was ours for keeps is increasingly being given to others. We're seen as being on the wrong side of history, the wrong side of so many issues and conversations. If this were a Western, we would be the guys wearing the black hats whose appearance is accompanied by the foreboding soundtrack. It's come as a surprise, we're not sure how it happened, we don't like it, we don't feel like we deserve it, but we are the bad guys now. End of long quote. So the Israelites went from privilege to oppression, but in the eyes of Pharaoh, that wasn't enough. Slavery wasn't enough. Exodus 1:15-16 says, Then the king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shiphrah, and the other named Puah. Shiphrah is still a common Jewish name. It's often pronounced Shiphrah and spelled with an F today. Puah, not so much. Not many people are calling their kids Puah. If you're looking for a girl's name in the future, there's a few for you to consider. And he said to them, when you're helping the Hebrew women give birth and see them upon the birth stool, if it is a son, then you shall put him to death. But if it is a daughter, then she shall live. So see the gradual incrementalism here, the gradual plan that is imposed against the children of Israel. We'll start by reshuffling the deck, reordering the cast, reordering society, you know. They were once up here, the Jewish people, the Hebrews, and now they're way down here. Repossess their property and productivity, reduce their population, restrict their families, restrict their employment, take away. So to paraphrase Stewart's commentary, it says there, if a regime wishes to be able to oppress a given group within a nation, it defines that group as an undermining force, a real danger, and a potential agent of societal destruction. It has worked repeatedly in history, time and again. In fact, Chuck Swindoll compares it to Nazi Germany in the 20th century. First, they denounced the Jews in the popular press. Then they started to deny them privilege. Then they started to destroy their livelihoods and their businesses. Then they made them wear badges to identify as Jews. And at that point, it wasn't really that far to the concentration camps and then to the ovens. So we have Israel in Egypt, a new king over Egypt. Now we have the suffering under the regime of Egypt. But all this time, in the middle of all that, we see God above Egypt. Above Egypt, the true and living God, the God above Egypt. And it is right here where we begin to catch glimpses of God intervening. It is here where God begins to get involved. Pharaoh tells the midwives, if it is a boy, if it's a boy baby, you put the boy to death right there at the birth stool. But look at verse 17. What did they do? Exodus 1:17-21. But the midwives feared God. Stop. But the midwives feared God. You know, amazing things can happen when you fear God more than you fear man. Now, I'm going to tell you, the fear of man is a powerful thing. You might think, I'm afraid of no man. But when the societal winds of change come, and your views are ridiculed or called antiquated, your position is considered harmful or dangerous, it's already happened. A lot of Christians have caved because of the fear of man. The midwives feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt had commanded them. But they let the boys live. So the king of Egypt called for the midwives and said to them, why have you done this thing? Why have you let the boys live? Now listen to this excuse, all right? Shiphrah and Puah. You know, I don't care how their names sound. These are some incredible women. The midwives said to Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not as the Egyptian women, for they are vigorous and give birth before the midwife can get them. So God was good to the midwives, and the people multiplied and became very mighty, Because the midwives feared God, and he established households for them. I'd say, first of all, these midwives, they demonstrated incredible courage. This was life or death, amazing courage. They disobeyed Pharaoh. And you will see from time to time, despite the way some people handle Romans 13, that there are occasions in Scripture where it is quite legitimate to disobey Pharaoh because you fear God. So they let the baby boys live. And so Pharaoh calls them in for a personal disciplinary meeting. He's going to begin their re-education project. We'll have a struggle session here. And he brings them in demanding to know why they spared the male infants. And Shipra and Pua come up with a good excuse. They're like, man, those Hebrew women, they're not like the Egyptian women. As soon as they begin labor, they're having the babies. Like, they're popping them out before we can get there. And Pharaoh went for him. This reminds me of another one, Rahab. Remember her story? Rahab, who lied to save lives. Interesting. The spies came to spy out the land, and she hid two of them and helped them escape. And she's named in the Great Faith chapter in Hebrew 11 because of this act. And it makes a great discussion that we won't get into now on the ethics of lying in order to save lives. But at any rate, God saw that the midwives spared the infants, and he rewarded them personally. And just a side note, it's amazing that these two midwives are called by name. They're called by name. We don't get Pharaoh's name. Scholars still debate exactly which Pharaoh was Pharaoh at the time of Moses. We don't get Pharaoh's name. We don't get the names of his magicians or the elders of Israel. We get these two women. Now, what if before this series began, I had asked you to make a list of the top 10 greatest women in all of Scripture? Would these two women have made your list? Did you even know their names before today? Next week, we meet 3 more women in chapter 3, and you put together these 5 women, and you see that they are indispensable to Bible history before Moses ever spoke a word. And they stood up for innocent and defenseless children. And God notices, and I want to tell you that God still notices when we stand up for innocent, defenseless children. And we must never stop doing that. That is exactly what Shipra and Pua do, and it's why we know them. See, what is the reason we know them? The Hebrew population is still exploding, so Pharaoh cranks it up another notch, and he goes public with this. He takes the campaign to a whole different level. Exodus 1:22. Then Pharaoh commanded, not the midwives, all his people, saying, every son who is born you are to cast into the Nile, and every daughter you are to keep alive. Pharaoh goes public with this. He's not even trying to hide it anymore. You know how some politicians work? First they try to veil and cloak, what it is they're up to, what they're doing. Try to downplay things. Try to reassure you. Believe me, it's not going there. This is not what it looks like. And soon they don't even care anymore. They don't try to hide it. This is how it's going to be. This is the new way. And you see, the Egyptian people worshipped the Nile River. It was a god to them. So it wouldn't have been a tough sell for them to accept the idea of offering innocent children to the god of the Nile. They've already reduced the Hebrews to subhumans with dangerous views. And now it's an easy step to take these undesirables and their infants and sacrifice them to the god of the Nile. But the true and the living God was watching. He was paying attention. He is above all. And next week, as we will see, Exodus 2, 24, 25. We're not there yet. We'll be in Exodus 2 next week. So God heard their groaning, we mentioned forgetfulness. God remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God saw the sons of Israel, and God took notice of them. And next week, when we exit chapter 2, the next week after that, and get to 3, we're going to see in Exodus 3, verse 7 and 8, the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and I have given heed to their cry because of their taskmasters, for I am aware of their sufferings. So I have come down to deliver them from the power of the Egyptians and to bring them up from that land to a good and spacious land, to a land flowing with milk and honey. So that's where we're going. Friends, we are hopping on that train with the children of Israel, and we're leaving the bondage of Egypt, and we're moving to the land of freedom, a land flowing with milk and honey. We're headed to the exit. And the good news is there is a way out of this mess. And I just want to invite you to walk with us as we find together over these next weeks the way out. The way out of Egypt. And on a personal note, I just have to tell you, I've been more excited about this book of Exodus than I have about any particular study in quite some time, because it's so relevant. This book is so where we are at in this VUCA world. I've given you that acronym before. Volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. We live in a VUCA world, and there's a way out. There's a way to navigate. There's a way to be free. So if you're willing to walk with us, I want to show you 3 things right here as we start the journey, and then we'll close. Some words of application. First, we need to reflect and apply where we can on the significance of their story. First thing I want you to see is the significance of the story. Because these events in the book of Exodus, they were predicted. They were predicted specifically. It was promised to Abraham in Genesis 15, 13 to 14, that he would be the father of a great nation. That they would enter the promised land. That there would be relief for their sufferings. Move them to the land of their inheritance. This would define the Hebrew people, display God's mighty power, fulfill God's promises, and carry out God's eternal plan, pave the way for Messiah, and prefigure spiritual truth, and shape the events and profile of human history. This is totally a big deal. If you consider yourself at all a student of the Bible, if you're at all interested in the things of God, things of the Bible, then the significance of their story here is indispensable. It's key to understanding Scripture. It's key to understanding what follows in Old Testament history and what is inaugurated through the coming of Jesus. So I want you to see, as Exodus unfolds, the significance of their story and how it set the stage for Jesus to come into the world. But the second thing I'd like you to see is the relevance to our story. It's their story, but it's relevant to our own. Now, when I talk about making application here in relevance to our own story, it's always a good reminder that we want to handle texts carefully. We want to be true to biblical texts and context and not misuse them or abuse them, right? Moses is recalling and recording the events of Hebrew history, including the story of his own birth. He's informing and reminding them of their past and is preserving it for future generations. And we want to see that primary message accurately and expect things like context and proper application, because oftentimes people who expound on Scripture can be guilty of taking passages out of context and forgetting who it was written to and why it was written and what God wanted when it was written. A preacher named Jared Wilson recently must have tired of this and posted about it. He said, Jeremiah 29:11 is not about health and wealth. You know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper, to harm you, plans to give you hope in the future. It's not about the prosperity gospel, but it was written to a specific people at a specific time. Is it relevant to us? Yes, of course it is, within its context. 2 Chronicles 7:14. It's not written to America. When my people who are called by my name will humble themselves. And, it's not written to America, but there's relevance to us. Okay? Proverbs 29:18. It's not about pastoral plans. Without a vision, the people perish, so the preacher gets up. Therefore, my vision for 2023 is this and thus. Well, that's not exactly what the verse is about. Matthew 18:20, where 2 or 3 are gathered, it's not talking about church attendance. Of course God is there in the midst. That's not necessarily a church or the church. Matthew 7:1 does not mean criticism is a sin. Philippians 4:13, I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. It's not about dunking a basketball. Okay? He's absolutely right. But the principles are there. So I can read about David swinging the sling and launching that stone and killing Goliath and still ask, what do I fear in my life? What giants have made me tremble? What Goliaths are there that I need to dispose of? I can hear the story of Zacchaeus and wonder, what are the impediments to me getting a better view of God through his son Jesus? What trees might I need to climb to get a better glimpse of Jesus? When I can see Jesus cast demons out of the Gerasene man, the Gadarene demoniac, and say, what needs to be cast out of my life? What needs to go? What demons need to be discarded? I can watch Joshua fight the Battle of Jericho, and I can decide, in Jesus' name and in God's power, there are some walls that need to come down in my life. I can study the boy with the fish and loaves and consider, what resource do I have that God can multiply? I can take these scriptures in context, but still make application of the principles. In fact, in Romans 15:4, for whatever was written in earlier times, it says, for whatever was written in earlier times, was written for our instruction. Now, this refers to the Old Testament. Was written for our instruction, so that through perseverance and the encouragement of the scriptures, we might have hope. But check this one out, 1 Corinthians 10:6. Now, these things happened as examples for us. And if you look at the context of that verse, it's actually referring back to the works of God in Exodus. That the things that happened in Exodus were done for our benefit. They're recorded for our benefit. And man, we live in a time where we need that. Because we live in a time where our culture does not know Joseph, does not know Jesus. And on a personal note, I've got about, I don't know, it's 32 or 33 years since I preached my first sermon. I started preaching in a church, some continuity. But I've got over 30 years in ministry and over 30 years preaching, and I can tell you things are way different than they were 30 years ago. The way people look at you, the way people respond to you, the nonsense, the rage and the outrage, it's way different. And there has arisen a Pharaoh who does not know Jesus. And some of you think this to the contrary, but you should know that I hate getting political. But God is God. God is Lord over politics. He's Lord over all things. And, we have leaders in our own country and in the West today that have slapped labels on Christians. Our own Prime Minister said that evangelical Christians are the worst part of Canadian society. Would you say that about the Jews or the Muslims? Would you say that about women? Would you say that about homosexuals? You see, it's not that the winds are shifting. They've shifted. And I don't have any animosity towards any of our leaders in Parliament. Let's get that straight. I pray for them. Whether it's a Conservative, or NDP, or Liberal, I pray for them. But it was like Oprah Winfrey, I think it was Oprah who used to say, I'm surprised I'm quoting her, but in any case, Something along these lines. When someone tells you who they are, or shows you who they are, believe them. Believe them. So there are plenty of tells. And I'm not longing nostalgically for the clock to spin back 30 years, or 40 years, or 50. We live in today. And I'm an optimist about what God is doing in our world today. The only reason I bring up such things that are happening in our cultural moment, in our cultural landscape, is not to beat a particular political drum. Please, please, please understand that. It is an integral part of my role as a shepherd and a pastor to warn the flock that things are going to get hard. And things could become very bewildering. And there may be acts of compliance that you are asked to affirm, that your conscience will not allow you to confirm. And it won't be live and let live. You will be squeezed. You will be squeezed. Job might be lost. Might be considered unwelcome. There will be cost. That day is here. As the great prophet Bob Dylan used to say, you don't have to be a weatherman to know which way the wind is blowing. And that's all I'm saying. It's a different day in our country than it used to be. Rather than pine and long for the old days, let's learn the way out from the books of Exodus. Let's celebrate what God is doing. And let's believe that the mighty hand of God has not lost any of this stuff. All right? God is still God. And the study of Exodus could not come at a better time, folks. There is a way out. There's a way out of the craziness of our current circumstances. There's a way out of the bondage of sin and Satan's control. There's a way out of that addiction you're struggling with. There's a way out of that emptiness you feel. There's a way out of that fear or maybe that dread or depression or anxiety that grips you. There's a way out of the evil that opposes you and the daily grind that sucks the life out of you. There's a way out of the haze and fog and bewildering circumstances of our times. There's a way out of this 2023 type world. And that way out has nothing to do with turning the page of a calendar and everything to do with turning to and turning the pages of our book, the Bible, and the truth contained in it, such as that in Exodus. Because I'm telling you, I am reminding you that there is a way out, that there is a way out, and it's relevant to our story. But here's the most important thing, I'm going to conclude with this. The most important thing, number 3, God is the story. God is the story. This is about the mighty hand of God. I noticed this week, every time, or almost every time, that expression, the mighty hand of God, appears in Scripture. You've seen that, right? It's all throughout the Psalms. Every time the mighty hand of God is used, it's referring back to Exodus. In the Psalms, you know, they sing songs of celebration about God's mighty hand, delivering them from slavery, delivering them from bondage. You know, I will sing unto the Lord, for he is triumphed gloriously, the horse and rider, cast into the sea. Right? It always refers back to something in Exodus. When we want to remember the mighty hand of God that worked and is working today, it calls us back to this story. The psalmist tells it when he wants to praise and remind us of the glory of God. Stephen, in the book of Acts, tells it when he wanted to testify to his own countrymen about Jesus. He takes them back and gives them a history lesson. Talks about Moses, talks about the mighty hand of God. He's confronting his own people. So this is about God. This is about God seeing, hearing, caring, and acting. This is about God distinguishing and delivering his people. This is about God punishing evil. This is about God blessing the whole world. This is about God keeping his promises. This is about God reigning supreme above all other gods. This is about God leading our spiritual journey and our lives as we march on as the church in obedience. This is about God showing us the way out. This is about the mighty hand of God. This is God's story, and it's about his glory. Amen. I've asked Pastor Dave if he could come and just lead us in prayer and lead us in the partaking of the Lord's Supper together. I'm trying hard to time this series so that we get the Passover right around Easter. But every time we have these elements, well, there's a little bit of the Passover happening. Dave, I invite you to come now. Thank you, brother.
If you haven't already, grab a communion offering on the side table. I invite you to do that right now. What a great launch into an amazing series that's going to transform and change. And I feel the change happening on the inside already just from this first message. Talking about being marginalized, going from popularity to becoming the problem. Have better company, better example than Jesus himself. And that's why he gives us these emblems so that we can see we are connected with him. And he is the way out, not only for us right now, but for every generation that is to come. So on the night that he was betrayed, did take the bread, and he broke it, giving thanks. He said, "This is my body broken for you. Let's eat it together." And as he took the cup, representing his blood, so this represents a new covenant that is in my blood. Let's drink it together. Jesus, we thank you that we are eternally connected. And just as we're fully aware of all that was going on with your people, you are still aware of everything that's going on in our lives personally, in the world that you have placed us in. We're not here just by chance, but we're here because you have caused us to be born now, or because the world is the way that it is, lost without you. Lord, you are making a difference. You're making a difference through us. We give our lives afresh to you. You use us this week, Lord, in every way possible, Lord. We honor you. We give you thanks this morning in Jesus' name.
You are good when there's nothing good in me. You are name, no other name. Jesus, Jesus. And I'm running to your arms, I'm running to your arms. The riches of your love will always be enough. Nothing compares to your embrace. Light of the world, forever reign. That's right. As Pastor Jim said, Jesus is the answer. Always be enough. Nothing compares to him. Present. Thank you, God, for being with us. Thank you for this church. And thank you for your word. Amen.